So I guess we can just get started and jump right into the content, if that
Let's do
sounds
it.
good to you. Okay, sounds good. We're here at Super Mobility Week, and obviously there's a ton of wireless executives here, lots of wireless demos and stuff. And so I wondered if you could just speak kind of real generally about how mobility and wireless plays into Avaya's, kind of thinking
Sure.
going forward.
Sure. Well, I mean, we're in a world today where mobility and wireless is sort of at the core of everything we do. You take a look at some of the studies where you see 40% of employees spending more than 20% of their time away from their desk, as an example. So, mobility is a big deal today. It's been a big deal, actually, for us for a while. You probably wouldn't know this, but we had some interesting applications that came out years ago of like extension to cellular, so you could essentially make your cellular phone be an extension to your business phone. Applications to allow contact center agents, for example, to be working on any device anywhere and basically forward everything from the enterprise. So we sort of had that sort of outlook on life. And then, of course, if you take a look at where we're at in the world today, where with bring your own device and the advent of the ability to be so mobile within the enterprise, and it's really kind of becoming a part of the way that we think about every application and every sort of use case in the communication world.
Do you have a sense as to sort of how the communication situation right now is divided between, for example, one of your customer base are the communications divided between wireless and wireline, or do you track that at all? And can you talk about the split?
The reality is that when we take a look at the use of wired or wireless communications in the enterprise, is that we're pretty much assuming that most people are going to be doing both now. So we look at it as sort of important that we support an ecosystem of applications and devices. So if you take a look at pretty much any smartphone, any tablet, our same soft client applications run on all of those as run on a PC or a Mac or on a telephone or a conference phone in an office. So we look at it more like people have an ecosystem of devices that they use together. And one of the things that's sort of critical, we think, from a user perspective is that you allow them to all have the same identity or phone number and allow them to seamlessly move back and forth between the devices depending on which device has the best interface or set of capabilities for what they want to do right now, whether it's voice, video, web conferencing, text messaging, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah, and obviously there's a different cost associated with a wired desk phone versus, a video call in the middle of nowhere. And so I'm wondering if there's any sort of billing or pricing mechanisms that you guys have for the wireless side of things in terms of keeping a cap on video calls, or you know what I mean? Like if that's a concern for you guys and for your customers.
Right. Well, when you start taking a look at the communications that we're orchestrating with our systems, business policy plays heavily into the way the enterprise solutions work. So we try to do a really good job of giving the enterprise IT organization the ability to provide different attributes as a matter of business policy. If you take a look, for example, at the recent Olympics over in Sochi, we provided all the networking, the unified communications, the contact center as a part of that. And one of the things that we did that was pretty unique, it's the first Olympics where it was a BYOD Olympics, and we supported 40,000 athletes, judges, volunteers, officials, and they brought an average of 3 devices apiece, and we had to identify them and authenticate them and provide the appropriate services. And as you can imagine, when you're providing wireless on the mountain, in the stadium, and at all the competitive events, policy becomes a really important question, because you start thinking about providing the ability to transport all the data associated with, for example, the games and the judges versus the athletes tweeting things versus the press trying to get the photograph of the gold medal event off to their studio or a magazine or whatever. And so part of the nature of our solutions is to be able to do things like virtualize the network, apply business policy, and set up the kinds of attributes that are required for each of those different players. So when you get into the cost question, it gives you that kind of control to decide that this class of user gets, priority and unlimited bandwidth, for example, to do HD video on anything from anywhere, or to basically say, this person's is coming in on an international circuit, and we want to basically limit and control what they're actually able to do with it.
Okay, so that the athletes don't eat up all the bandwidth with Instagram or whatever they might be doing.
It's interesting because during the opening ceremony, most of the bandwidth was used by applications like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And in the closing ceremony, it was applications like Box, Dropbox, the Google Drive, iCloud, and our perception of that was that people sort of learned through the course of the Olympics the difference. The professionals learned that this was a reliable service that they could take advantage of, and so you were seeing high resolution video and photographs being sent.
And that's the goal, right? Is to sort of encourage professional use of these services. That's not necessarily Instagram, but more
Absolutely.
Yeah, mission critical stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you'd have somebody taking a photograph who would, for the press that might be in the middle of the mountain, and that photograph is already, back to their headquarters by the time that skier crosses the finish line at the bottom.
Right. Yeah. Kind of neat stuff. Yeah. So I want to change the topic just a little bit and maybe move into a discussion of, in your role as CTO, I know that you are kind of looking ahead and trying to figure out where things are going. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think is real interesting, one of the trends that I think is real interesting and certainly relevant to this discussion is the idea that wireless phones and wireless would eventually become a permanent replacement for even desk phones in an office setting. Mm-hmm. Because it's relatively inexpensive, and the spectrum usage is very efficient, and it's possible. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if that is something that you're seeing on your end, and if that is actually a possibility for some of the clients, all the clients.
It's something that's talked about a lot. I've seen very few customers that have actually made that flip. There's a couple, and they're seen pretty much as real innovators in their space and an experiment in some respects. We have one customer who's a manufacturer of mobile devices that you'd sort of expect to just either go that direction or go with a pure soft client kind of implementation. And there still tends to be sort of that split between a certain class of users in the enterprise that sort of wants to be able to walk into their office or cube and have that device that's always on, that's not being rebooted. And you think about conference phones and things like that. There's a couple of different attributes that we're starting to see emerge. One is that there's environments where having a very high quality set of speakers, microphones, and things like that becomes a key requirement. Doesn't necessarily mean that has to be in a traditional phone, but it means that's a set of capabilities that might need to be in an environment. So like, for example, we just released a new docking station that lets you plug your tablet or smartphone into it, but it's completely interconnected into the whole enterprise telephony environment, so that you have sort of all the attributes you'd expect from a desk phone or conference phone, along with the ability to use your mobile device and contacts and everything else. The other thing that we're seeing is, most people have more devices today than they had 2 years ago, not less.
Right.
And one of the things that's been important for us is to put our applications across all of them, so that you really can use whatever you want. So if for myself, I might start a conversation on my smartphone, move it to my tablet, add video, and walk down the hall, walk into my office, and move it to a video conference, display, or to a conference phone, or to another set of assets that I might have there. So what we've done is to do a lot of work to make sure that all these work seamlessly together, and you can literally mid-call switch from one device or application to another one. And it makes a tremendous difference in terms of just sort of being able to do whatever you need to do from wherever you're at and have the right capabilities to do it.
Huh. Then some of that sounds like Wi-Fi calling, which has been kind of a perennial topic in the wireless industry. But like, how important is Wi-Fi calling to this type of scenario that you're describing?
Yeah, Wi-Fi calling tends to be something that's commonly used as a part of this, especially when you start thinking about video. or web conferencing and other things. It becomes a better channel in some cases, and certainly can affect cost. Different parts of the world, it's more important than other parts of the world.
Yeah.
You know, as you travel around Europe, for example, you see people spending a lot of time thinking about where does the call originate from, and you know, how does it cross those boundaries. So, you know, you get into a lot of interesting, not just technology issues, but regulatory issues, obviously, as you go around the world.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm sure international calling it's probably a big topic for you and your clients, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, people want to have, first off, they want to have that great connection. They want to have that you know, big bandwidth consuming high def video experience. They want to be pushing their PowerPoint slides back and forth, and you know, increasingly they want to have high quality voice experience as well. And to do all that, you know, there's places where you know, the Wi-Fi is going to provide bandwidth that you need to do it at a cost that's effective. At the same time, as you get into places in the world where you've got you know, LTE readily available and the costs are reasonable, you know, we're in a world where we can push all those same kinds of things through that world as well. But I think, you know, you'll see environments where people might push part of the experience over the mobile network and part of it over the Wi-Fi network as well.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. So another area that I wanted to touch on is kind of a discussion about unified communications, and specifically how mobile communications can be integrated into an enterprise situation, and whether that's, I mean, how important is that? So specifically though, like, is integrating SMS and email and, you know, other mobile forms of communication into a unified communication system, like how much work have you guys put into that, and is that, I mean, is that like a major requirement for these?
There's a lot of work being done in that area, and I think there's also a lot sort of yet to come in terms of the evolution of the capabilities in that space. You know, it's sort of interesting when you think about it. On the one hand, you know, our kids spend all day doing SMS and they don't do much else. On the other hand, a lot of folks also are using instant messaging, they're using SMS, MMS, they're using email, they're using voicemail in some cases. You know, as you go through all these different messaging modalities, you know, you wonder, okay, why does someone use all of those different ones at the same time? And you start, if you peel back the onion and you start looking at what are sort of the characteristics of each of them, you start to get a sense that there's different reasons why you might want to do that. So for example, in an enterprise, if you might not want to use IM or SMS for everything because you might want to have multiple conversations going on with the same person at the same time on different topics. Well, threaded messages aren't really, you know, an inherent part of the way we think about IM or SMS generally. It's sort of one ongoing conversation. And yet, on the other hand, the short message attributes associated with instant messaging or SMS are highly desirable by lots of people. It's quick, it's fast. And oh, by the way, why should it be limited to voice? You know, just as we've gotten used to an MMS world with video in the enterprise, pictures and video should be you know, able to be sent the same way. And I think the opportunity is to start to blend these together, but pay attention to the characteristics of those different types of messages. Let them be threaded, let them be social, let you publish them, let people subscribe to them if that's what you want to have happen. But at the same time, recognize what we've learned from, you know, really what started in the consumer industry with short messaging and how that's highly desired and something that people have gotten used to doing. And you know, especially as we watch our kids grow up, that's going to be the way they're going to expect to communicate in the enterprise as well. Right. So we actually have released, like last year, we released an application that lets you let people send SMS to your business number. And we can have that show up on your telephone. We can have it show up in a soft client on any of your devices. And I think increasingly you're going to see that kind of thing and move them all together. For me, one of the interesting experiences with that is, you know, you think about the feature that's on a lot of mobile phones where you, somebody calls you and you can't answer right now, and you press the button to send them a text message that says, I'm doing something, or I'll call you back. Well, if they're calling you from a business phone number, in most cases today, you end up getting an error back. Whereas if you have our technology associated with your business phone number, you know, there's not going to be any error, and both sides are going to be able to exchange an SMS around that topic. Right. So it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's something that the first time you do that, you kind of go, oh, this kind of changes the game.
Right. And a usable way of communicating and actually, efficient way of
sometimes very simple things make a very big difference.
Yeah. Just briefly, I wondered if you could talk about smartphones in the enterprise, and I mean, is there any preference for iPhone, Windows Phone, Android, and I'm assuming you guys support those and work with them, but I mean, just in terms of trends of.
Well, we support all the above, and what we run into in our customers is the same thing that we see in terms of the general trends of the smartphones. Apple sort of changed the game with iPhone, and Android has become a very major player since. You do see a lot of debate about how much control the enterprise can apply to the security and the use of the devices and the applications. For our customer base, oftentimes we have compliance issues where, think about in the banking industry, investment bankers, private banking, things like that. There's a lot of requirements around the world to record those calls, and to be able to create an audit trail and that kind of thing. So that ends up playing into the platforms sometimes because sometimes you have greater access to be able to manipulate what happens there. That also plays into, I think, what you'll see happen is an evolution in terms of carriers working with enterprise communication suppliers like Avaya, and the ability to create hybrid services that are really linking those two things together to make that work more seamlessly.
So I'm glad you brought that up because, like I said, we're here at Super Mobility Week, and wireless carriers are, definitely a major part of this trade show and the wireless industry in general. And so they have been moving to all IP architectures, and the most recent example of that is launching voice over LTE technology. And so I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit and what that switch over to IP calling means for the enterprise market, and whether the design of the carrier networks means that you can start doing those kind of integrations with the carriers directly.
Yeah, it's really an exciting world right now with that kind of changeover. I mean, if you take a look at a company like Avaya, when I got here 6 years ago, we were 2/3 hardware. And today we're 2/3 software and services, and increasingly it's becoming cloud-based solutions. And one of the things that makes that possible is we take a look at the move to SIP over Ethernet and getting rid of all those hardware gateways and everything that exists today. Now it becomes really just a pure software and service world. So that's one step that sort of helps simplify things and create new opportunities. Another key thing that we did, one of our flagship platforms is called the Avaya Aura solution, and it's got a IMS type session manager at its core that was really modeled after the carrier IMS model. And that creates a lot of potential applications capability that we've exploited within the enterprise. But as the carriers increasingly start looking at how can they do a better job of integrating into those enterprise environments with services, it becomes a great model for linking our IMS core together with the carriers and to be able to facilitate new types of applications. And you see a lot of things that people like, whether it's compliance, regulatory, recording applications as an example, where if you're an employee and this number is registered, when you make a phone call, basically the carrier could fork that media back to a recording server that's inside the enterprise so that they can meet their compliance requirements as an example. Identity would be another good example where obviously security has become increasingly critical, and we have a lot of talk about multi-factor authentication. And you start thinking about the fact that, well, I've logged into my mobile device, that sort of gets me one factor of authentication that's associated with an IMEI number. And if as that call travels around the world and ends up in a call center, for example, someplace that's or at a banker's desk, if you're able to basically pass that information through, you're already providing at least one factor of authentication that then can be added to with whatever other identification techniques are used. And so what happens when you start doing applications this way is to the consumer, things become easier. They're not repeating their information all the time. And at the same time, they're becoming more secure. And it's not as intrusive in our lives. It's sort of just happening. So I think a lot of new applications are possible. I think we've just started scratching the surface. Right now what we're seeing is some of the world's largest enterprises basically pushing the carriers and pushing ourselves to come together and figure out how to deliver some of these services. And the technology is really there. In some cases you've got regulatory issues that you've got to sort of get over the top of, and you have the issue of, am I going to be the first one, and those kinds of things with some of the enterprises as well.
You mentioned cloud, and I just want to ask about that real quickly. Is there a debate about which cloud provider? Is it the Verizon cloud or is it the Avaya cloud? Like, how do those discussions happen? And is that an area of concern about where that data is being processed?
Where it's being processed.
Yeah.
So,
which cloud do they use?
Yeah.
Which cloud are they selecting?
Right. So you end up with different data centers in the cloud being used for different reasons. There's people that are HIPAA compliant or meet government compliance regulations. It depends on what you're trying to do. So you've got that sort of issue at play. And then you've just sort of got the general enterprise questions about security, redundancy, what kinds of SLAs are people willing to provide or not provide. And on the one hand, you could say that some of the large cloud service providers that are providing compute, they're so big and they have such bandwidth that it should be fine. But you still don't have an SLA that comes out of that. And when you start getting into enterprise applications,
you need that SLA.
People want to sign up for that SLA.
Right.
They want to know where the data is going to be stored. Is it in this country or a different country? And some countries have rules about what they allow to have happen there. In other cases, it's enterprise have internal rules about what they're going to do there.
Okay.
But I think the models are everything that you could possibly imagine. For us, what it means as a technology provider is that over the last few years we've had to make our products so that they can run on the premise, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid of the two. We've seen a big move in the cloud from sort of let's build a multi-tenant instance of our solutions, and then a cloud service provider uses that to put multiple users on it, to a world where, especially on the enterprise side, people want just basically a virtualized instance of the full stack for each of the enterprises. And that gets rid of a lot of the security questions because at least they're not sharing some of the same software. And
so it sounds like it gets really complicated to figure out what the requirements are and try to meet them, and each one is a little bit different.
It's funny because on the one hand it sounds complicated, on the other hand the goal of it is to make it simple. And so you want somebody to be able to provision a service, be up and running in 10 minutes, and have the confidence that it's got everything it needs behind it. And so that's really the approach that we're taking. It's one thing, it's sort of like I could walk you through what it takes to build a watch, or we could just talk about what it takes to tell time on the watch. And so, as a technology provider, we have to worry about all that back-end stuff, and we have to worry about regulatory and everything else. But the ultimate goal is that if you want to be able to tell time, we can sell you the ability to tell time. You don't have to worry about all the rest of it.
You have to worry about the back-end. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we have just a few more minutes left, and so I wanted to ask you just kind of a broad question about, in the next year or so, like from your standpoint, what is the big trend, and what are you working on now in terms of technologies to make sure that you're catching those trends?
Yeah.
Anything.
We're a big trend right now is digital enterprise transformation, which is really driving things like digital customer engagement across every possible channel and device. And so you see consumers basically with all kinds of various devices and ways of communicating, and we're seeing a lot of companies bringing those together. It's sort of interesting because the telephony world sort of lost some of the excitement in the enterprise over the last 5 or 6 years, while new forms of communication, text and video and other forms of communications have been kind of some of the hot commodities, social. And now what's happening is that they're starting to come together, and sort of that ability of the voice world to scale, to operate in a world where they have to do millions of transactions a month, a year, a day in some cases.
Right.
the digital media are starting to come and say, how can I take advantage of what you guys know? And we're seeing more and more that's driving those worlds together. And so from a wireless perspective, what that means is that basically any kind of device that any consumer's on at any time and all the various modalities that device supports, not just voice, but video and SMS and everything else, come into play. And also along with that, all the things that are happening with wearables. So you start to think about the fact that I've got a smartwatch or I've got a fitness band on my wrist or something that's pumping out information about my health. I was actually with a IT manager at one of the major medical centers recently, and he said that they're getting to the point where they can pretty reliably predict 3 days before you're going to have a heart attack with pretty simple sensors. So now you start thinking about all this kind of information tied to all these mobile devices that all these people are wearing with sensors, GPS, communications. Now you start feeding that back through areas that we've traditionally been strong in, like the contact center, as sort of that broker that then can feed that back to the right experts, family, doctors, et cetera, and you can start to imagine all kinds of new applications. And we talk a lot about the Internet of Things right now, but as we put these mobile sensors and communication capabilities into everybody's pocket and everybody's wrist, we're actually, in some respects, going back to connecting people to people in a new way that I think is going to drive all kinds of very interesting applications as well.
So I'm hearing I should buy a Apple Watch so that I don't have a heart attack. That's what I'm hearing. Anyway. So I think we're out of time. So thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much.